Hi everybody, it's Meredith. Today I want to talk about logbooks. Now, as a student pilot, you have a logbook, perhaps similar to this one. This is the first logbook I ever had as a student pilot back in 2001. If you're a flight instructor, a commercial pilot, even an airline pilot, you probably still have a paper logbook or maybe an electronic one that you use to record your flight time. Now, we'll get into the regulations on logbooks and what needs to be logged in just a minute. But the main reason I decided to make this video was because when I get customers coming to the flight school from other flight schools, one of the very first things that I do is audit their logbook. I need to see that their previous instructor or instructors have correctly and legally logged all of the required flight time for the certificate or rating that the student is pursuing. Most of the time, it has not been logged correctly. There are errors, there are omissions, or both, that need to be corrected or addressed before the student can move forward. And this is a public service announcement to you flight instructors, okay, especially you new folks, that when you have your customer, and remember they're your customer, your student, but they're your customer, when you have their logbook in your hot little hand and you get ready to pick up that pen to write something in their logbook, I want you to remember that that logbook belongs to them. It is not yours, it belongs to them. It is their personal property. It is very valuable, and you need to treat it with respect. You need to slow down, write legibly, think about what you're going to write, and make sure that everything that needs to be in there is in there. Oftentimes when I do audits of logbooks for customers coming in from other flight schools seeking to finish their training with us, I'll be going through their logbook, and most of the time I find errors or omissions of things that were not logged correctly by their previous flight instructors. And this is sad because sometimes it's as bad as, and I had a couple of these recently, 2 within the last month, students come to me from other flight schools where there were such egregious errors and omissions of required training that their student pilot solo flight time was questionably legal, to the point where I had to tell them, look, if you don't get this fixed or make an effort to correct this and address the training discrepancies that are logged in your logbook, you're not going to be able to complete your program. The designated pilot examiner is going to look at this and send you back because the training was not completed in accordance to the FAA standards. So flight instructors, just please, 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 for the sake of this industry and your customer, slow down and think through what you need to log. Write carefully, write legibly, all right? I'm sure you all have heard of the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Instructors, I want you to think back to when you were a student pilot, when you had your first logbook, and you were so excited about the first time you landed the airplane with your instructor's help, the first time you landed it without any assistance, and all of those things that you had to do, and every dollar that you, or perhaps someone that you love, spent for that flight training. This is an extremely valuable document, okay? And I want you instructors to make an extra effort to treat it with care, because all too often I see people coming in with just disgusting errors in their logbook that could have been prevented if the instructor had just taken a bit of care. And I'm just one flight instructor at one flight school in one little town in Florida. I'm sure that if you're an instructor or a flight school owner like me, you're probably going, I've seen that before too. So let's just stop that, okay? If you're mentoring a new instructor, please encourage your instructors to just slow down and treat their clients' logbooks with a bit more care. Let me give you a couple of examples of the more common things that I've seen wrong in students' logbooks that I've audited from other flight schools. So pre-solo, 6187D, that's in the Federal Aviation Regulations, says that we as flight instructors have to provide and log these 15 things before a student can make their first solo flight. And some of the more common things that I see missing are emergency procedures, go-arounds, collision avoidance, proper pre-flight procedures. Say that 10 times fast, right? So these are things that hopefully the instructor did, but in the eyes of the FAA, if it's not in the logbook, it never happened. You have to appreciate the fact that this endeavor, learning how to fly, becoming a pilot of any level, okay, is very highly regulated by the government. Like it or not, it is. And you have to make sure that everything that needed to be in there to satisfy those requirements was in there. So one of the more common things I see written in logbooks a lot is the phrase pattern work. In fact, on a recent logbook audit, one of the worst ones that I've done recently, the instructor, starting with day one with this student, on every single line wrote the phrase pattern work. And that's pretty much all he wrote. He did include some other things, but not all of the required training per 6187 was included in this student's logbook, not even close. Almost exclusively, the only thing that was written was pattern work. Now, the problem with that is 6187, in fact, nowhere in Part 61 does the FAA recognize the phrase pattern work. What kind of pattern are we working on here? Was it a traffic pattern, right? We kind of colloquially assume that's what we're talking about. But this is a legal document. This is referring to a federal regulation. You can't just make up your own phraseology here, guys. Stick to the regulatory requirements and what they say. Now, I understand that some of 6187 and lots of the other requirements in the federal regulations are wordy, okay? I don't write very small. Now, that's one thing I always commend Dana on is I always joke that, he could fit the entire Gettysburg Address on one line of a logbook. It's a little exaggeration, but you get my point. He can write very legibly in like 6-point Helvetica. There is no question what Dana writes in a logbook. He's got exceptional penmanship. I'm not quite that good, but I do a pretty good job. So for example, if I was working with a student, a pre-solo student, and I got to doing power off and power on stalls, 6187D number 10, and I'm looking down here to read it off of the regulatory app that I have, it says, stall entries from various flight attitudes and power combinations with recovery initiated at the first indication of a stall and recovery from a full stall. Okay, that's a lot to write in a logbook. I certainly don't write that entire phrase, but what do I put? I put 6187D 10. That way there's no question what happened. Now, if after that, I would like to put maybe power on and power off stalls and recoveries, fine. You can include that there, mostly for the student's edification, because they may not, in looking at their logbook, intuitively know what 6187D number 10 is. Like, well, what did we do? When did we do stalls? So if you write the word in there for their benefit, that's easier to read for the student rather than just the numbers. But for the student's benefit down the road, when the examiner audits their logbook, and I can't attest that every examiner out there in the United States does a thorough audit like this. Apparently some of them don't, because one customer that came to me recently had 300 hours. He was already a private pilot and wanted to work on his instrument and commercial. I found gross errors in his logbook that obviously weren't caught. So you just want to cover your butts here, guys. Remember, what we do here in aviation, even general aviation, is highly regulated by the government. You want to give your customer, the student, every chance of success. You want to make their dollar count. So do them and yourself a favor by putting the regulatory reference in the logbook, and then for their benefit, you can also include some comments about what happened during the lesson. But absolutely make sure that you include, for example, for a pre-solo student in an airplane, all 15 of those things.
If you're a new instructor, you might want to review Task K on the Flight Instructor ACS, which covers endorsements and logbook entries. Based on what I'm seeing, I'm not too sure that this topic is being adequately addressed by DPEs. Regardless of how long you've been a flight instructor, it's always a good idea to keep an updated copy of AC 61-65 on hand. I always reference this document when issuing endorsements to reduce the chance that I might make a mistake. Students, you can also use this document to double-check your instructor's work. So, why am I such a stickler for logbook neatness and accuracy? Well, before I became a flight instructor, I spent 10 years working as a journalist, writing and editing copy for newspapers, magazines, trade publications, and websites. In that business, at least back then, you wouldn't dream of publishing anything without it being carefully edited and reviewed. Routine logbook audits are standard operating procedure at our flight school. We are extremely fortunate to have a local DPE who not only shares our commitment to accuracy, he offers to review applicants' logbooks in advance to prevent hiccups on the day of the check ride. That's really awesome customer service. So here's a fun fact about logbooks. The FAA doesn't really define what a logbook is. In fact, you can actually use a paper napkin if you want. Oftentimes we get questions from students on whether for-flight logbooks are legal, and the answer is yes. If you look at AC 120-78B, it explains that under Part 61 at least, you can use any means that you like.
Okay, so if you are a student pilot working towards your private pilot certificate, and this is your first rodeo using a logbook, okay, and you maybe have never had anybody audit it before, you certainly haven't taken your practical test yet, so a lot of this might be new to you. I want to tell you today that, again, as a reminder, this book belongs to you. It doesn't belong to your flight school. It doesn't belong to the FAA. It belongs to you. And you should feel free to include notes in here as well. For example, if you have a solo flight that you make and maybe you encounter some turbulence or a new experience, it's okay to make those notes in there. Because look, you're gonna look back on this 10, 20, 30 years later. You may even show your children this one day. And it's a nice little memoir. You know, you should feel very proud of all of the experiences that you had, even the ones that maybe weren't so great. Maybe you made a not so great landing or got a little lost on a cross country or whatever happened to you, okay? It's all right to note it in there. This belongs to you. And the other thing I see student pilots neglecting to do a lot is add up the totals in their logbook. It should seem obvious. I know when I was a student pilot and I got to the first or second page of my logbook, I wanted to count those hours after every single day that I flew. And I was so excited when I finally had double digits. I remember calling up my dad and saying, I've got 10 plus whatever hours in my logbook. I was so happy because I knew that it was that much closer to the 40 hours that I needed to earn my certificate. You may recall in my recent video that I did about reaching 6,000 hours. That was kind of a big deal. You know, I've worked for a long time, very hard to become a good pilot. So it is a nice little feather in your cap when you achieve a milestone like that. So I think sometimes students don't keep up with adding up their columns and checking the notes that their instructors put in there because they feel a little disassociated with it. Remember, this belongs to you. Treasure it, care for it, and treat it with the respect that it deserves, that you deserve. One small note for you folks working on your instrument and your commercial pilot certificates. I want you to take a careful read of 61.129. That's the commercial pilot experience requirements. Now, if you're working on your instrument rating right now and you expect to earn a commercial pilot certificate down the road, I want you to make sure that your instructor logs your instrument time, the simulated instrument time. It needs to be a minimum of 10 hours of this, 6165, which is the instrument rating requirement, and 61.129, which is the instrument experience requirements for the commercial pilot certificate. In my opinion, this is the dumbest thing in the world because I think if you are a private pilot in possession of an instrument rating and you earn the rest of the total flight time and experience requirements to be eligible for a commercial pilot certificate, you should automatically receive credit for the instrument time requirement for the commercial pilot certificate because you have an instrument rating. I think it's totally dumb that the FAA says, no, you have to specifically log whether the instrument training was done in furtherance of 6165 and or 61.129. It doesn't make any sense, but that's the federal government. That's what the FAA wants. Again, if you're working on your instrument rating right now and you expect to earn a commercial pilot certificate down the road, Even if you're not sure, get it logged that way anyway. That way down the road, when you go to apply for your commercial pilot certificate, you don't have to randomly redo 10 hours of instrument training that you already did as part of your instrument rating requirements. Another point for you folks that are working on your commercial pilot certificate is, again, in 61-129, now we're on number 4, 10 hours of solo flight time in a single engine airplane, or 10 hours of flight time performing the duties of pilot in command in a single engine airplane. This is commonly referred to now as the PDPIC, performing the duties of pilot in command. So this is basically where you have a flight instructor sitting next to you as a babysitter, not providing instruction. They're just sort of hanging out for whatever reason while you go and do your business that counts toward this time that you otherwise could have done solo. Why shouldn't a potential commercial pilot logging this flight time be allowed to fly around with their spouse or their kids or their dog? Why does it have to be solo, i.e. you're the only one in the airplane, or you are sitting here with this random flight instructor who is allegedly doing nothing except adding weight to your weight and balance spreadsheet? I don't get it. But regardless, you have to make sure, again, that you log it specifically one way or the other. And because of that "or" in the sentence, you can't combine it. So for example, if you happen to have a CFI buddy sitting next to you on a flight for 2 of the hours, but the rest of the time you were solo, you can't mix and match them because it says 10 hours of solo flight time in a single engine airplane, or 10 hours of flight time performing the duties of pilot in command in a single engine airplane with an authorized instructor on board. So again, this is a totally dumb word salad by the FAA, but if you go into it knowing what you're dealing with and you log your flight time accordingly, you're going to save yourself a whole lot of time and money down the road. All right, so that's my 2 cents on logbooks. I hope you found that useful. If you did, please consider liking the video, subscribing to my channel, and just as a reminder to all you flight instructors out there, please act professionally, treat your customers with respect, treat their logbook with respect, and I think that'll be better for everybody. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.